Okay, hello everyone. My name is Michael Downey, and as host of today's session, I'm very pleased to welcome you to an AWRI webinar. Today's session will take a look at PMapp, a digital tool helping growers identify and assess powdery mildew. And I'm lucky to have with me here today Professor Eileen Scott to help guide the conversation for the session. Eileen's most recent research has focused on developing objective methods for measuring the severity of grapevine powdery mildew, and as part of this project, she led development on an application for smartphones and tablets. Eileen is the JAT Mortlock Professor of Plant Pathology at the University of Adelaide, and with over 25 years of experience in teaching and research on fungal and bacterial plant diseases of grapevines, it is a great privilege to have her joining today's webinar. And I'd also like to invite you, the audience, to join today's conversation. So to ask a question, please open the Q&A section of the webinar, type in your question and click to send. A Q&A will be held following Eileen's presentation. If you'd like to get involved through Twitter, please use the Twitter handle @_AWRI. The webinar is also being recorded and will be available to view later this afternoon from the AWRI's YouTube channel. Now, I'd also like to thank and acknowledge Wine Australia for providing funding and support for AWRI webinars. Now, for anyone that's just joined us, welcome. The topic for today's webinar is PMapp, digital tool to facilitate in-field assessment of powdery mildew on grapes. And I'll hand over now to our speaker, Eileen Scott, to start the conversation.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much for listening in to this presentation. I'll begin by acknowledging my co-authors, each of whom has made a substantial contribution to development of this app. And Wade Perry was the person who built the software with us. Bit of background, first of all. Powdery mildew is the most costly disease affecting Australian viticulture. And in a survey conducted by or led by Schofield and Morrison in 2009, the cost Australia-wide was estimated at $76 million a year in lost yield and cost of management. Powdery mildew causes loss of quality. Research done in New York State in the early 1980s suggested that as little as 3% disease could cause reduced quality, but there wasn't much data on quality published in this paper. Our research in the CRC for viticulture in Australia documented detrimental effects on grapes and wine made from Chardonnay with various amounts of powdery mildew. Most consistently, an oily viscous mouthfeel in wine increased with increasing powdery mildew severity. Various detection thresholds have been published worldwide, very variable, and most recently, German researchers reported a decrease in vanilla aroma as the main problem that they came across. But this 3% detection has stuck. And most Australian wineries, or many Australian wineries, will use a threshold of acceptability of grapes of 3 to 5% of the consignment affected by powdery mildew. This is based on visual assessment, which we acknowledge to be subjective. We know that visual assessment depends on the training and experience of the assessor and the environment in which the grapes are assessed. So because of that, the Australian grape and wine industry was keen to develop accurate and objective measures for powdery mildew. And the part of the project I'm going to talk about is the work we undertook to refine approaches for visual assessment in the interim until objective measures are available, while acknowledging that visual assessment is subjective. So disease in the vineyard is commonly assessed as incidence and severity. Incidence in this context would mean the number of bunches diseased out of the total number that we assessed. And that's typically done early in the season to guide management. Severity is typically assessed closer to harvest because it's most closely related to quality. And here we're assessing the area of the bunch, or the proportion of the bunch affected out of the total area that we assess. So at the beginning of our project, we put together a project reference group, and they volunteered a couple of keys that were commonly in use. But both of these keys or neither of these keys provides much guidance at the lower end of the scale, the 3 to 5% severity, which is critical to industry for acceptability of fruit. And also they show all berries that are affected are 100% are fully affected, and this is more typical of botrytis bunch rot than it is of powdery mildew. So the group agreed that there was a need for more categories at the low end of the scale in a key, and that part berries affected should be shown. Similar to this key at the bottom right, which was developed by Bob Emmett and Trevor Wicks, but never actually published. It was used only for research purposes. So the lack of a standard approach to assessment has led to inconsistencies in assessment of powdery mildew in the grape and wine sector. So in close consultation with our project steering group and their contacts, we set about developing an app to help to standardise assessment of powdery mildew in the vineyard. PMapp, we called it, is available in both Apple and Android formats, and it's been available for 2 vintages in Australasia, and it was released globally in November 2016. It's a free download, and it has 4 main functions to assist users to assess powdery mildew, and I'll summarise these briefly in the next few slides. And it also has a detailed help and about section for those who are less conversant with app technology. So the assessment screen, first of all, it allows the user to set up the assessment details, the location, block, vineyard, notes on their sampling strategy if they're following their winery protocol or whatever else they're doing. The user would then go through their sampling strategy, examine each bunch, decide which disease severity category was the best fit, tap that on the screen, it turns blue, and then they move on to the next one. The screen has a focus at the low end of the scale, which is we consider to be important for our users. And as the user goes through, they can see the cumulative count of bunches that they have assessed, cumulative incidence, and cumulative severity. And they can toggle between patch and row stats to work out how they're going. At the end of an assessment, the user can then export the data to a nominated email account, and the cover note in that email will document their sampling strategy and any other notes that they put in when they set up the screen. Should the user want a bit of support as they're going through their assessment, they can call up an image browser and a key for guidance on area assessment. This image browser, for a start, is a bank that's made up of a number of images. We started off thinking that photographs would be the best bet, but it was very hard for people to see disease on these photographs. Photographs were large and took up far too much battery power, and the computer-generated images that we came up with were just too uniform. So we developed a new set of computer-generated images to guide disease assessment. We have 139 of them in the app. Bit more detail on those. Those images come in 25 severity levels with that focus on the low end of the scale again. 1% increments up to 10%, large increments thereafter, and they come in up to 6 bunch configurations. And the set shown on the screen is this 3% powdery mildew severity, in which the blue spots or blue shading represent powdery mildew colonies on the bunch. We checked those images to make sure that the area was as accurate as possible using freeware image J from National Institutes of Health in the US and the American Phytopathological Society's ASSESS program. And so we have them to within 1% accuracy at the low end of the scale and a slightly more tolerance as we get towards the upper levels of that scale. We also worked on developing a consistent key that we could make available to users. And this was developed through a series of workshops with our project steering group. Our members tested 6 keys in laboratory conditions, and these keys had increments of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6% severity or shading at the low end of the scale. The group determined that the key with 2% increments between 2 and 12% was the most useful for commercial purposes and for research purposes. And so we put this in the app as a new key for assessing powdery mildew. We didn't have convincing evidence that this improved accuracy in the field, but the field study we did was very small, And we're not about to try and overturn years of experience and publications in this area by saying that our very small study disputes the fact that standard area diagrams are very helpful for disease assessment. That would need more work. So those are that component. Then the self-calibration component was put in to help users to test their accuracy on the go. So a user can call up a self-calibration test of 10 images or 20 images. They come out of the image bank. The user estimates the severity on the bunch they see, enters that, and at the end of the test, they get an outcome for their accuracy and bias, whether they're assessing high or assessing low. And on this test, I've assessed a bit on the high side. So we recommend that a user do the 20 image set as a minimum at the beginning of the season and the 10 image set at the beginning of each disease assessment session. So the purpose of PMapp is to facilitate in-field disease assessment, to make it easier to record data on incidence and severity, and then have those data emailed to oneself so there's no ambiguity. And the user can also calibrate their ability to assess area as they go. We are very keen to get across that it is not a decision support tool because the user interprets their own data to make their own decisions about what they're going to do with grape harvest, grape pricing, and any other purpose. As the app came close to development and we'd done some beta testing, our project steering group recommended that we develop some resources to assist with training for pre-assessment phase. Basically, how to assess disease, how to recognize the disease, and how to improve on area assessment accuracy. So the research team put together a suite of online resources which we'd like to see used for pre-vintage training for new staff or as a refresher for existing staff so they can refresh their skills. And we're aware that many people would do that at the beginning of the season. So this is designed to be done on a computer in the office before someone goes out. The website's given here and it's got 4 components. The Vineyard Powdery Mildew Assessment Guide is a text-based stepwise guide to assessing powdery mildew on bunches, and it's got links in it to the app and also to the other components. So if the user goes through the guide and says, I'm not 100% confident I can recognize powdery mildew, they can click on the link to the training to improve their ability to diagnose it based on its symptoms and signs. If they are lacking in confidence in assessing area, they can do area assessment training. And this is modelled on the BRAT assessment trainer, bunch rod assessment trainer, developed by Plant and Food in New Zealand by Gareth Hill, Rob Beresford and Kathy Evans. The online resources also have the 2% key as in PMapp, and the two are completely interlinked. So teasing out a little bit the online resources to support PMapp. The disease recognition exercise is made up of 28 high-resolution photographs of bunches, and they were taken for us by Eric Wilkes. The user is presented with 3 images of the same photograph, with different areas outlined in blue or pink for black grapes, and asked to tell us which one has powdery mildew outlined most correctly. It's very difficult to see on a screen like this. It is in fact the middle one that's correct. But in doing this online, the user is able to hover over the image, zoom in, and greatly enlarge what they see on the screen, which makes it much easier to pick up those symptoms. So we have white and black grapes in there, the majority being white, some images taken at veraison and more closer to harvest. And we also have a set of images of diseases and disorders which can be confused with powdery mildew, including spray deposits, downy mildew, and some bunch rots. Turning now to the area assessment tool, the user can dial up a test which covers the low range severity with 20 images, or almost the full range of disease severity that might occur in a really badly diseased crop with 30 images, and can choose whether to allow 10 or 20 seconds per image they assess. Again, the images are available in PMapp. And this is an example output from an assessment done with the low end, at the low end of the scale with 20 images. And it's a plot of what the user thought the area shaded on the bunch was versus the actual area on the image as determined by the image assessment software. The dots obviously represent the 20 assessments. The bigger the circle, the longer the person took to make that decision. The blue line shows the agreement of the assessed with the actual. And in this case, there is good agreement with the actual. The concordance value is 0.96, and that's on a scale of 0 to 1, where 1 is perfect. This user also had almost perfect reproducibility, and that's the orange spot on the screen there. And this is determined by 3 images showing the same disease severity, and the user each time thought that the 5% image actually had 6% disease severity. So the user was consistent, if slightly overestimating the area shaded on that particular bunch. So this can be printed off, it can be taken to a prospective employer, it can be used in any way, and the user can do this as many times as they want to. And all it takes is going to the website, entering an email address, setting up your own password, logging in, and then the previous attempts that were made on the area assessment tool are there, and they can be reflected on as a user may seek to improve their area assessment skills. In terms of uptake, as of May this year, we had over 2,700 downloads. We had a breakdown of the Apple downloads, and we're assuming that the Android is similar. Mostly in Asia Pacific, that's Australasia. But I presented the app at the International Downy and Powdery Mildew Workshop in Oregon in July, and we got great enthusiasm from the extension representatives in Oregon and Washington State, who immediately went off and downloaded it, so I reckon this might go up a bit. How is it being used? It's being used by our project partners Accolade as part of their standard operating procedure, at least for the assessment component, and they're keen to build in a daily self-calibration into the SOP. CCW Cooperative, a large grower cooperative, is using PMapp as part of their SOP, and altogether we've got over 500 assessments made there. And a large multinational wine group is not using the assessment screen, but is using the other resources to train their field staff in recognizing disease and in estimating area affected. The table grape growers have contacted me because they're finding their growers are using it to assess insect damage, and we're in a conversation about whether we can tailor this to suit their needs. Some of the independent assessors are using it, and we're using it in teaching students at the University of Adelaide and Charles Sturt University in Australia. I just downloaded this for a bit of fun. I looked at the website yesterday for Google Play to see how it was tracking. Glenn Creasy is a viticulturist known to some of you, and we've had a bit of a conversation about it. But I'd particularly like to know who is the person who didn't like it, why they found it not useful, and how we could improve on that. And I do wonder whether this is one person who found the GPS was not sufficiently accurate, because we've been soliciting feedback from anybody who's used the app, and the most important thing that people mention is that the GPS function is not sufficiently accurate. It refers to the nearest phone tower, and that's not particularly useful in regional areas where grapes are grown. So we're working with Wade Perry, the software developer, to improve the accuracy of this function. And we're also, once that's done, planning to provide instructions on how to map disease using the app data. We'd also like to build in the ability for the user to configure the screen so they can just use the buttons they use most commonly. And we are well aware that people are using the app to assess bunch rots and other diseases. And we would like to integrate parallel screens so that users can pull up a checklist of other diseases and disorders, whichever part of the plant is being affected, and then enter the data from there. And I road tested this with 60 viticulture and enology students yesterday in the vineyard, and they were using it to assess Utica dieback using a 5-point severity scale published by Mark Sosnowski and co-authors in Wine and Viticulture Journal in September last year. And they then entered their assessments using the PMapp Assessment screen. And they thought this was fantastic, particularly because it was raining and they could get out of the vineyard faster. But yes, they said it was great fun and they enjoyed using it. So we're hopeful that we can expand on this. I'm always keen to see feedback on how people perceive the app and the online resources. More than happy to hear from people by email. And in finishing off my little presentation here, I have to acknowledge quite a number of people. I won't go through them all, but I'm particularly grateful to the project steering group that comprised people from Adelaide Wines, Pernod Ricard Wines, Treasury Wine Estates, CCW Limited, Metallic Viticulture, Henderson Vineyard Services, and several project managers from Wine Australia who faithfully attended our meetings and gave us input into the development. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to some questions.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for your presentation, Eileen. We'll move directly from here into a Q&A. So Eileen's going to stick around for a little while. If you've got any questions, please start to send them through. Just a quick reminder, if you would like to ask a question, open the Q&A part of your webinar, type in a question and click to send. I'll read aloud your question and we'll get Eileen to answer it. We haven't got any questions yet, so just a quick reminder for people that are interested in the next AWRI webinar. That's on Thursday, the 2nd of November, and the topic for that session, we'll be discussing another smartphone app, and that's an assessment of water stress in vineyards, which will be presented by Sadi's Mark Skew. So if you want to register or you're interested in attending, please visit the AWRI website to register. Okay, so we've got a question here. Okay, Dave has asked a comment more than a question. There are some very nifty new GPS units that plug straight into the iPhone to increase the level of accuracy to less than 1 meter. Check out the R1 by Trimble. Do you have any comments around that?
No. Nope. I wasn't aware of that. So you said it was the R1?
Yes, R1. R1 by Trimble.
By Trimble. We will look that up because Wade Perry is already looking into improving the GPS ability. And if we can do that more easily by a plugin, then that would be a very good opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments there, Dave. Something to follow up for Eileen and perhaps check back later to see what happens there. We don't have any additional questions at this stage. Eileen, did you want to make any final comments or have anything that you want to say before we start to wrap the session up?
As much as anything to say that this is something that's been very much driven by interaction with the grape and wine sector in Australia, and we're pleased to have it available worldwide now, and we're more than happy to take feedback on how this can be improved into the future. Suggestions are putting 3D images in there, perhaps a bit beyond our capability at the moment, but that may be something that we might manage to build in the future, depending on demand by users. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your comments there, Eileen. And if anyone does have any feedback or questions after the webinar, you can contact Eileen directly or the AWRR, and I'll forward your inquiries through to Eileen. So to wrap the session up, I'd first like to extend a thank you to Eileen for providing the content for what I hope has been a very informative session. I'd also like to thank you, the audience, for participating in today's session. There will be a follow-up email following this webinar with a link to the recording. I already mentioned that there is a webinar next week. The details for that are on your screen now. That's all we have for today. Thank you again for attending, and I look forward to seeing you at the next AWRI webinar.